Okay, so we are now almost on the last part of this lecture. So we have talked about genes, we have talked about DNA, RNA, how the information flows, which is called the central dogma. We have talked about codons, we have talked about amino acids, we have talked about proteins, and we have talked about the genetic code. The last thing in this lecture we need to learn about is the evolution. So basically, evolution, the theory of evolution, there is a very famous theory of evolution which you must be knowing. There was a scientist called Charles Darwin, and he gave a theory. That theory is called the theory of evolution by Charles Darwin. According to this theory, basically all the organisms, they are modified descendants of common ancestors, which basically means we have all descended from the common ancestors. So basically, to explain you this concept, the science believes that the life originated in water. So there were some gases in the environment, and there was some lightning. Because of the reaction of these gases which were in the environment and the lightning which gave the energy to the reaction, they were the first organic molecules formed, and they were formed in water. And from those organic molecules, the first life forms came into being. And from there, from the first the life forms, after that all the different species, they came into being from those first living organisms. So there are like a lot of life forms, they are all aquatic, and from the aquatic life forms, they came to the land. Those life forms, they came to the land, and then they became terrestrial. So if you see around, you see around around 100 million species. So all the organisms which are formed, all this biological diversity is because of the process of evolution. And this process of evolution says that the organisms, they have to adapt to the environment. So adaptation to the environment means there's like a competition in the environment, and survival is always of the fittest, and the nature chooses the organisms which adapt to the environment, to the best form, to the best way. So if there are harsh conditions in the environment, there is some pressure in the environment, the nature is going to choose those organisms which will adapt best to those conditions, which means they will change themselves, and they will adjust in the environment, and they will survive. And the organisms which survive, then they can reproduce, and they can form their own offsprings. And this process is called natural selection, which means selection by the nature of those organisms which survive in a best way, survival of the fittest. So this is all what is behind the theory of evolution given by Charles Darwin. He says that all the biological species which you see around, they are all descendants of the ancestors, the common ancestors. But why they became different? They became different because they had to adapt to the environment, and to adapt to the environment they had to change themselves. And that change, the most important thing is that change was at their DNA level, because if anything takes place at the DNA level, only then it is heritable, which means it can be passed to the next generation. So they were changing themselves, and that change was happening in their DNA, and that change was in the form of some mutations. Mutations means some sudden changes in the DNA, and that change in DNA was giving them better characteristics, because DNA codes for proteins, which means that change was happening, and they were making some now different proteins, and those proteins were giving the organism overall a character by which they were able to survive better in the environment. And when they were surviving, they were reproducing, they were propagating their own species. This is natural selection, selection by the nature. And slowly so basically, which means that we have originated from common ancestors, and our most ancient ancestor is bacteria. So I mean, this theory says that now even we will see, we will study we will do all these phylogenetic studies in this course. You will see the similarities between various organisms. We will do phylogenetic studies. We will see some of the genes, how they are same in different organisms, and people have found using all these bioinformatics tools that there are some genes which are present in bacteria and the same genes are present in humans also. So we are related to bacteria, and it is considered that bacteria is our most ancient ancestor, which basically means we have originated from bacteria. But how did all this development took place? That's by evolution, that slowly changes were happening, and at one point the change becomes so much, and that change, don't forget that it is at DNA level, it's a heritable change. At one point the change became so much that it became a different species, and this process is responsible for formation of so many species we see around. So let's go over this theory, evolution theory by Charles Darwin. So I've told you the basis of this theory. I'm going to go over the PowerPoint and show you some examples which will make you understand this thing better. So organisms are modified descendants of common ancestors. Evolution explains pattern of unity and diversity in living organisms. So basically, if you see all the organisms around you, we are very diverse, but we have some of the characteristics which are similar in us, and that shows that we are connected, we are related. So similar traits among organisms are explained by descendant from common ancestors. So you will see that some of the things, like one example of typical example of this is like there are some very small organisms called protozoa which are like present in water and all that. So they are like one single cell organisms. So they have on their body, they have small appendages called cilia by which they move. We have, like, we are humans, we are the most complex form of life. In our respiratory tract we have some epithelial cells, and those epithelial cells have the same kind of appendages that those organisms they have. So those small appendages called cilia are present in our cells too. So that shows us we are somehow connected with those organisms, and those cilia are helping in the movement of mucus and all those things in our respiratory tract. So there are some structures which are present in very different organisms, which means we are related somehow. Differences among organisms are explained by accumulation of heritable changes. So we are related, but why we became different? Because we had to survive to environment, and to survive to the environment we have to have some changes, and those changes were taking place at our DNA level. So there are around 10 million to 100 million species around us, and we can divide all these organisms into three main domains. So the whole biological world can be divided into three main domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukaryota. So bacteria, archaea, and eukaryota. So these are the three main domains in which all the biological organisms can be divided. Bacteria involves all your bugs. Archaea are also like your bugs. They are unicellular organisms. They can be in the form of those clusters, as you can see here, but they're unicellular. They're very much like bacteria, but they have some characteristics which make them different from the bacteria. These organisms, they can survive very harsh conditions. They can live in acidic pH. They can live in salt conditions. They can survive in hot temperatures. And this is eukaryota, and we belong to eukaryota. So this can be divided into plants, animals, fungus, and the protists. So protists is basically a very miscellaneous group. It involves all the protozoas, the various diatoms, all these organisms, molds, they all belong to this. Fungus, as you know what fungus is, mushroom is fungus, yeast is fungus, molds are fungus. Then plants, you know what plants are, animals, and we belong to. So this is the eukaryota domain. So we belong to eukaryota. So basically Charles Darwin, he wrote a book on the natural selection. So this evolutionary theory was given by Charles Darwin. It's a very big theory in biology, and whole biology is standing on this Charles Darwin theory. So this evolutionary view of life came into sharp focus in November 1859 when Charles Darwin published one of the most important and influential book ever written on the origin of species by means of natural selection. So he wrote on how these species were originated by the means of natural selection. So Darwin made 2 points. Species showed evidence of descent with modification from common ancestors. So we have descended from the common ancestors, but we have modifications. And why do we have those modifications? To survive, because the survival is going to be the fittest. And to survive, we have to adjust, and we have to have some modifications or some changes, and those changes were taking place at the DNA level. Natural selection is the mechanism behind the descent with modification, and the organisms which fit best to the environment, they are going to be selected by the nature, and that process is called natural selection. So this is a picture of Charles Darwin. So this is all what I have said right now. So all what is written here, that they so to survive, they have to have some changes in their DNA. Here is an example of like a natural selection. So basically you can see here, this is a population of beetles, and they're sitting on some soil, and you can see the color of the soil is dark. So this is a bird who is going to eat them. So you can see here all the beetles which are light skinned, because the background is black. The light skinned ones are going to be recognized easily by this bird, and this bird is going to eat them. So the ones, these beetles with light color, they are going to be recognized by the bird, and they will be eaten, and their population will be eliminated. And these beetles, they realize that their population is getting eliminated, because so this is a kind of a condition for them in the environment, that if they want to survive, something has to be done so that they can avoid the attention of this bird. So to do that, some change will take place, some random change will take place in their DNA, and because of that their body color will also become dark, and when they become dark, they cannot be recognized by this bird because they will merge into the background. So this is the way they are going to survive in the environment. So this is example of the natural selection. So if some change will take place in their DNA, and because of that change in DNA, maybe they're making some protein, and that protein gives dark color to the body, and then they cannot be recognized by the bird. Because of that, they can survive. And another example of natural selection is like bat's wing. You know, bats, these are like kinds of mammals. They are the only ones which have these wings. The mammals don't have wings. So, and also people have found that this is a mammal, bat is a mammal, and they have wings. So these are the bones. So these bats, they have a kind of a webbing in between these bones, and people have found similarity of these bones with the forelimbs of humans and the horses, flippers of whales. So they're very similar, but they have this different character. So we don't have in our forelimbs, we don't have this, we don't have this kind of a webbing. But why do these bats, they have this kind of a character? Maybe they were in some kind of an environment where they had to, like if they wanted to survive, they had to fly. So that is why they developed this kind of a webbing between these bones, and they formed their wings, and they could fly, and they could survive whatever the harsh condition might be there in the environment. So this is another example of your natural selection. So that's all about evolution. That's all we need to learn about the evolution. So I hope things are clear to you. If you have any question, you can please always contact me, send me email, send me message, and I'll be very happy to answer your questions and make things more clear to you.